All right. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone, all your bright and shiny faces after a week off. And I would have loved to have one more week off, but to keep us on schedule, we had to have one more before our break. So I'll have it at the very end, but this is our last one until January 18th to give everyone a time to celebrate with their families and not have to deal with me for a little bit. And there's a drill weekend in there too in January, so that's why it went all the way to the third week in January. But I said, it's kind of a great break for all of us and me with having to do it. It's fun, I enjoy it, so I'm glad that we're able to keep doing it. So today we get to go over I think we're in lesson 11, right? Lesson 11, the judges forestall threats, which is kind of a fun one because I know you guys have heard me refer to Deborah a few times in here, so I get to talk about her a little bit. It doesn't just focus on her, but it's one of my favorite because of the two different types of explaining her story that they have in there and the rest of it. And then, of course, the assignment reading did have you read Ruth. It doesn't go into Ruth at all, but it's a good bridge to where we're moving into next because our next lesson is called the Philistine Menace. I know you guys are all going to remember this over this like 3-4 week break, but we get to talk about why the Philistines were a big deal as these Israelites didn't do what they were supposed to do. So our assignment, I haven't gone over the assignments a lot because there wasn't a lot of questions in the previous ones, but there was 3 in these as you read through. So in assignment 11, it says, answer the following. How's the message of the book of Judges related to Joshua's remark in chapter 23, verses 11 through 13? And in there, what it talks about is, well, we'll talk about exactly what it says, that they lived among the people that they were called to be separated from. Essentially, in that conquest, as they went through, they were called through to basically kill, maim, destroy, and get rid of all of these other people that were in their land. They did the opposite. They conquered, but then they decided to live with them. They made the alliances that we talked about in one of the last ones. Um, because of that, they were drawn to the paganism, right? Because they were a polytheistic society, so they had multiple gods. So again, as you live in proximity, and I think I might have talked about that in previous lessons, when you live in proximity quite regularly with these type of people, you start getting interested in it. And I think at some point during this lesson, I talk about our God is not necessarily a sexy God in a way, because we're not allowed to make images. You're not allowed to make idols, and all these different things. Whereas their society had that, like they had an image to worship, a vision, something to see with it, and it just became more of an interesting type thing to worship for them. And then within that, Joshua, it talks about I will make them traps and snares if you're not driven them out. And obviously, we're going to see that as we continue through all these judges. Question number 2 is what relationship between Israel's moral strength and its national strength? And it's directly related. So we see that their moral failures directly affected their actual strength of their nation as they go out and conquer. Because as they have a moral failure, they're not able to conquer, which we kind of saw in the conquest when they had failed in some of the battles. Is the historical authenticity of Judges 5 altered in any way by Deborah's use of poetic media to convey her story? Is the story she conveys any less true because it's in poetic form? So with that, no. And you guys, like at the very beginning when we were talking about the different interpretations in the Bible and what we have to read and how we have to read it, we know that that story is a retelling of Deborah's story, right? As she was a prophetess there and what she went through with that, just in a poetic media form. And really, when you think about it, back in those days when anything was put in a song, it was kind of like immortalized, right? Because the reason it's in a song is so it can be repeated. Those people that would sing it would be able to tell the story over and over again, and it would continue. And then read Judges, and do these passages provide any clue as to the function of judges? And what we see over and over again is that the Israelites did whatever they wanted, and a deliverer would be raised up to bring them back and closer to God. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue on into this one. All right, Judges. So 12 judges in there. We're going to talk about the 6 major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, making sure I'm counting them correctly. So as we go through, we'll get to talk just a little bit about each one of those and why it's important. But I didn't forget. See, I started getting right into it. Who's the greatest comedian in the Bible? I love how y'all just already start grinning just a little bit, knowing it's going to be something, some sort of dad joke. Oh, Samson, because he really brought the house down. But right? I'm getting pretty good at finding ones that kind of relate to what we're talking about, right? Like sometimes I'm stretching a little bit when I'm with them. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today to study your word, to continue to worship you, studying a little bit more about your chosen people in the Old Testament and how that relates to you, Lord, and your Son, Jesus Christ. Be with us today as we are in the Advent season, and continue to be with us as we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so to start out, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this new environment that the Israelites are in. And it's a little bit of compare and contrast and why this is important as they lived among, right? We just talked about they lived among these paganists, this polytheistic society that had these different gods. So remember that the Israelites had been wandering, they've been on the move, they hadn't really had their own place for a very long time. And then you have the Canaanites, which was an agrarian society. They'd stayed there. They were stationary, they were permanent, they were living in the land already. They had already occupied it. So the Israelites at that time, because they were nomads, were dependent on what they found, whether it's the food, the resources, where they were at the time. But again, because these Canaanites had already lived there, they were already dependent on the fertility of the soil and farming that land that they had already had. So again, when I talk about the sexiness of our God, right? We were monotheistic. We were one God, and it was hard for them to understand when you're living among this polytheistic society that had, excuse me, many gods. And Baal, they'll talk about the Baals in a plural sense too, because essentially Baal could represent a lot of different things within there. But they had many gods for specific purposes. So it's easy to be like, yeah, if I worship this one, I know I'm going to have fertility. I'm going to have long life. I'm going to have food. I'm going to have this. Whereas, again, having the one God. Imageless worship, because once we know that we had the Ten Commandments, which we knew was in the Ark of the Covenant, we knew that we weren't to make idols. And they didn't have a vision or a view or a picture of what their God looked like that they were worshiping. So it's much easier if you think about even how we function as a society to say, hey, if I can see something or I have something to look at, it's much easier for me to worship. So you can see where they would kind of want to combine both of these things a little bit. And then we had high moral standards, right? Because we had certain rules, and by we, I mean the Israelites at the time, certain rules that we had to continue to live by. And with them, they kind of were able to run rampant and then go worship their God and get forgiveness for it. So as we talk about the judges, I think this is what's blocking it. Talk about what a judge is. So us thinking about judges, think about the legal position that they're in, but that's not necessarily what they're talking about with these Israelites. So it's not a legal term because they weren't in a legal position at the time. Their authority wasn't absolute or permanent or hereditary. It wasn't passed down at the time. So it was the direct rule of God over his people through the designated representative to meet a specific situation or crisis. That is like a school definition that I hate with it. So what I want you guys to think about as we talk about these judges is more them as a deliverer, a response to a certain incident that they were encountering at the time. So there's a couple different ways that people look at this cycle that has happened through judges. So one of them is what you'll recognize throughout is that there was a period of peace where they continued to worship their God. Then they would worship the Baals and sin, the apostasy, which is desertion of God. So they'll worship, right, because they kind of step outside what they're supposed to be doing and kind of dabble in both worlds. And as they do that, there's the attack of the oppressor, which is God's judgment. So that's when he delivers them in the hands of somebody else as they go through these cycles. Then there's and then there's the oppression by an outside force with that, and then the repentance where they cry out to God saying, please deliver us, please help us, please do this for us because this is pretty terrible, and we realize that what we're doing was kind of wrong, so please help us out. And then what happens is the deliverer is raised up, the judge, to provide an authority, a leadership position, and bring them out of whatever they're currently in. And then you'll see there's a period of peace, 40 years, we see quite often in there, 40 years, and it goes through this whole cycle again. So this is a more complicated way that the Bethel series presents this. One that I had learned back was all the R's with this cycle, right? To me, this is much easier for me to remember, but then I'm going to start getting R's out of order, is a lot of what happens. So they rebel, they get rebuked by God, right? They repent, and then they get rescued by the judge or the deliverer, and then they have rest. So easiest way that I've been able to remember these ones. So I thought I'd put that out there for you guys if it's easier for you guys to understand it. So that we know what this cycle is going on, let's go into exactly what the lesson says. So we're going to go back to Joshua a little bit. So Joshua sounded a warning that the main battle was over and the victory had been won. So that whole Joshua chapter 12 verses 1 through 24, I thought about reading it, but it's essentially the story of all the kings that they had defeated throughout that time. So remember that they went through this whole conquest. They defeated all these people, and it lists all those kings. And then the conquered land had been distributed to the tribes, which is listed in Joshua 13, 7, 22 through 34. So that shows where the tribe of Manasseh goes, the tribe of Judah goes, what land they were given. And if you guys ever are curious at what it looks like, you can Google and you can find lots of maps out there of what they predicted that looked like. And I think we looked at one a lesson or two ago too that kind of showed how that land had been distributed. So Joshua had seen a sleeping giant which could rise up and turn Israel's victory into ashes. So they knew that while this conquest had happened and they'd been given their land per the covenant that they had been promised, that there was still some issues out there. All the land that they had been promised had not been fully possessed yet. And pagan people still dwelled in the land because, again, they didn't get rid of all of them like they were called to do. They ended up living among them and making some alliances with some of them when they shouldn't have. So, again, now they're living coinciding with these people. So in Joshua 13, I think I still have it up, Joshua 13, 1 through 6, it says, right, 1 through 6, yeah. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north. All of it had counted as Canaanite through held by 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, the territory of the Avites on the south, all the land of the Canaanites, from Arah to the Sidonians as far as Aphek on the border of the Amorites, the area of Byblos, and all Lebanon to the east from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Mesrephoth, Maim, that is, all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance as I have instructed you." All right, so we know that there's a lot of land that was not taken over yet. And I should have had you guys read that one just because there were so many fun names that I just got to read there. But so we know that there was plenty of land that had not been taken yet. And so if the Israelites were to succumb to the idolatrous influences in their midst, their glory would be lost. Meaning if they started going into this pagan side, this polytheistic society, everything that they were promised and everything that they were supposed to be wouldn't work out. So Joshua had realized this. So because of that, he said, "Take good heed to yourselves, therefore, to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and join the remnant of these nations left here among you, and make marriages with them so that you marry their women and they yours, know assuredly that the Lord your God will not continue to drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a scourge on your sides and thorns in your eyes." Joshua knew. And then if you guys did your homework assignment or read Judges, you guys know that essentially that's exactly what happened. He told them ahead of time. He saw what was going to happen. So now this sleeping giant awakens. So just a few generations after the conquest, which we talked about last 2 weeks ago, these words of Joshua came back to haunt the nation. The sleeping giant had awakened and was prowling in the land, anxious to make Israel its victim. So paganism, because again, they lived among these people and did exactly what Joshua had told them not to do, became a part of their blood, a part of their life. So the narrative describes the process. So in Judges, it says, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were round about them and bowed down to them." So now we're saying that they lived among these people. They still had their gods, those gods in their land, and they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So we know that we saw that multiple times as we read through Judges. Again, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. Again, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And we know kind of generally where that leads. So those political enemies become God's instruments of judgment. So those enemies that were still in that territory were now going to be used against them. So those who bowed both to the Lord and the Baals wouldn't be of any use in the kingdom because they were told and they were called not to do that. Israel could not be forever mixing darkness with light and expect to maintain its uniqueness as the chosen people, right? Because they were chosen. They were meant to do it this way, and it was not going to work as long as they continued to worship these other gods. So we see that judgment was inevitable. You start messing up, someone's going to correct you somehow, some way. So God judged the Israelites for their apostasy by permitting them to be vanquished by enemies, by losing essentially. So when you see the disheveled figure in the bottom right, this guy right here, because I know everyone was wondering what that guy's all about. So that's personification of Israel's political enemies during the period of the Judges. And I'll talk a little bit, I think it talks a little bit about it, but I'll start touching on it. Because as we go into the Philistine menace, they're going to depict what the Philistines looked like, which are going to be well-equipped, armored soldiers, right? Because they had all of those things that they needed in order to fight in battle. But the people that were in the land with the Israelites were more of just kind of a primitive society. They didn't have a whole lot. So what's where you'll see the broken and tattered clothes, some primitive type weaponry with that as well. So in Judges 2, 14 and 15, going backwards. Nope, forwards. Let's see. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of the raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. And in 3:8, actually, I'll just bring these all up right away because I know there's a few of them. Someone wants to start looking for 3:12 and 14 for me. I'll read 3:8. Let's see, Othniel. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of the Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. And if someone can get 3:12 through 14 for me.
Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In alliance with the Ammonites and the Amalekites, he went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of Palms. So the Israelites served King Eglon of Moab 18 years.
All right, and in 4:2 it says, "So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who resigned over Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help." I actually read an extra verse in there. So we're seeing these political enemies that they're dealing with as they have to continue to deal with all of these 5 different this cycle they go through. And I almost had 6:1. Skipping Deborah, we're going to go to Gideon. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord for 7 years. He gave them into the hands of the Midianites. So we see that they're delivered, right? Every time that they did evil, right? We see it, heard that multiple times just now. Evil in the eyes of the Lord. All right, well, now you're going to be delivered into the hands of these people that you are living among at the time. So who were these enemies? So the strong powers of the day, Egypt included, had their own problems at home and were not much concerned over the events in far off Palestine. So those large countries it didn't matter to them kind of what was going over in this area. And as long as Israel didn't tamper with their trade routes along those coastal plains, those nations were content to let Israel do its own thing. Uh, and we can kind of see that with how things work today, right? Like a lot of these bigger countries, we'll just let you do whatever you want as long as it doesn't really affect what we're doing. That's kind of the view that they had during that time. So the figure with the stone axe, those are represent Israel's enemies during the period of the judges, and they were small powers of the immediate area. So that included formerly vanquished tribes, right? Some of those tribes that because as much as you try and vanquish them, you're probably not going to be able to get rid of each and every one of them. So some of those tribes, maybe there's onesies, twosies left that are going to continue to try and rebuild. New nations in the area, the Canaanite city-states, which had remained autonomous, they kind of were working on their own and weren't dealt with at the time. And so Israel, being morally and spiritually weak, became easy prey at that time for these land-hungry nations because they wanted to grow and spread. And they were an easy target at the time. So that deliverance from what was going on came through the judges. So since he'd used Israel's enemies as instruments of divine judgment, the Creator used the judges as instruments of deliverance, right? To deliver them from those enemies that they had been uh, given into in order to draw closer to God and bring them back on the right path. So this figure with the tunic and the broken axe, those small powers who had attacked the Israelites and subjected them to bondage for those periods, were defeated by under the rallies of the judges. I won't say by the judges. Some of the judges did it themselves, and sometimes the judges just helped others or were an instrument in a way to get help them be delivered. So behind it, I know it's harder to see in your binders. I'm sure it's easier to see. There's a vacant throne behind them. And we're kind of looking into the future as we work through this, why that vacant throne would be there. Because Israel, during the period of the judges, was loosely organized confederacy. They had no king or central government. They didn't have a person in charge. And towards the end of it, you start seeing, and then you'll see the first half, there's the judges, and in the second half of judges, you start hearing, at the time there was no king. At the time there was no king. And it's kind of given us a peek into what the future is because, one, they're going to start asking for a king. If you guys, I'm giving the story away ahead of time. They're going to start asking for a king, and they're going to get a king, and they're not going to be happy because now they have a king. So we're going to see that. It's going to be fun. So as a young nation, Israel had no federal head. I'm just watching my time today. I get to be a bell ringer today, so we're making sure I end on time for the most part. Judges 17:6 says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Right? So we see the first time that they start talking about Israel had no king. And in 18:1, in those days, Israel had no king. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle because they had not come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. And again, in 19:1, in those days, Israel had no king. Now, a Levite who lived in a remote area in a hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And in 21, verse 25, man, I did pretty good. I highlighted these so I can find them quick. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. The very last line in Judges, they had no king and they did whatever they wanted. It's kind of like leaving children at home with no parents for a full day. We know that they're gonna, well, the parents are away, the children will play, right? We know where all those lines start coming from. So following that initial conquest, the victors became a loose confederacy of clans, and each of the 12 tribes were an autonomous unit. They all did their own thing. They weren't working together. They had no way to be brought together at the time. So because they didn't have that organization, the tribes were vulnerable to attacks. But the people believed that God alone was to rule them, and no earthly king must take that right from them. And it talks about that right there in Judges 8. My favorite part when we get to jump back and forth. but it makes good points. 8:22 and 23. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." So now we're seeing I'm not meant to be in charge of you. I'm not meant to be your king. The only king we have is up there. Worship him and do as you're told through him. Now, Judges 9, verses 1 through 25. Let me see where that one's going to end. It's a long one. All right. 9, 1 through 25. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother and brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, "Ask the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood." When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they said they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is related to us." They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, his youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar of Shechem to crown Abimelech king. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees?" Next the trees said to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?" And then the trees said to the vine, "Come and be our king." But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees?" Finally all the trees said to the thorn bush, "Come and be our king." The thorn bush said to the trees, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon." Have you acted honorably and in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Jerubbaal and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered his 70 sons on a single stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female slave, king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is related to you. So have you acted honorably and in good faith toward Jerubbaal and his family to this day? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled, escaping Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. After Abimelech had governed Israel 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, so that they acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal's 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged in their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem, who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, the citizens of Shechem set men on hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by, and this was reported to Abimelech. One of my favorite stories, because it's like you get this poetic media as he talks about these trees asking for a king. And it all comes back to they're all asking for a king. We're looking into the future, that these people keep wanting someone to rule over them, to tell them what to do, instead of trusting in God and doing what they're supposed to with God. So that's right. So it was the judge them who God raised up to organize the 12 tribes so that they might cope effectively with the oppressors. So those judges were to help bring them together so that they would not look for these kings. Because we see as they get a king, God stirred it up in them to basically revolt against that king and become abreast. So one of the descriptions of the judges was by this guy named John Bright in one of his books. He says, "Here we see the clans maintaining a precarious existence surrounded by foes without government, central authority, or state organization of any sort. In times of danger, there would arise a hero, once upon whom the Spirit of Yahweh rushed, called a judge. He would rally the surrounded clans and deal with the foe. While his victories no doubt gained him prestige, he was no sense a king. His authority was neither absolute over all Israel nor permanent. In no case was it hereditary. The battle strength of the judge was the voluntary levy of the clans. He had no standing army, no court, no administrative machinery whatever. His authority rested solely in those dynamic qualities which made him man of the hour. This type of authority has been aptly called charisma, and charisma well represented the primitive theocracy of Israel. It was this direct rule of God over his people through his designated representative. So we see again why these judges came in and what it meant to them. Because some of these people, they may not have had leadership qualities. Again, when you look at Deborah, she was a prophetess at the time, and then she worked through some other people as she went through her story as well. So the judges in action. The Bible names 12 judges. We're only going to talk about 6 of these judges because they've been given prominent mention in the book of Judges. So meaning like you'll hear major judges and minor judges, kind of like you hear major prophets and minor prophets. Doesn't mean anything else other than they get more than like 2 lines in their story. As you guys read through, it was like, there was this guy, he ruled, and there was peace for 40 years. Like, oh, that's cool. Well, there's not much to talk about with that because obviously he was important enough to write down in history, but not important enough at the time to tell the story. More of the story. There's a lot of questions that I have as I read through those stories too. So those figures in the center are representing the 6 major judges in Israel. So the judge with the raised arm on the far left is Othniel, who delivered Israel from the Mesopotamian oppression, which is in Judges 3, 9 through 11, is what I'm going to read. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. All right, so we got to hear the whole story of Othniel, one of the shorter ones, one of the first ones mentioned. But God raised him up, and there was peace until he died for that 40 years. The judge with the sword in the hand, one of the most interesting stories in this whole series here. So Ehud delivered Israel from the Moabite attack. The sword in his hand, symbolic of the gift, and I should have put that in quotes, the gift given to King Eglon, because his gift was the sword, but to his extremely fat belly. All right, 3:12 through 30. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, which he had strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you. The king said to his attendants, Leave us, and they all left. Ehud then approached them while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked, and they said, He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace. They waited to the point of embarrassment, and when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their lord fallen on the floor dead. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Sarah. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. Follow me, he ordered, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands. So they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab, and they allowed no one to cross over. At the time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong, not one escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. Again, one of the most interesting stories in there. I have lots of questions, and I could probably do a whole lesson just talking about this gift that was given to the king of Eglon there. All right, so that's another one of the judges. So the judge with the spike in the hand, Deborah. So Deborah, 4:1 through 24, I got. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now that Ehud was dead, so the Lord sold them to the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of the army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have her disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from the Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to them, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops, to the Kishon River, and give them into your hands. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I'm not going to go. Certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and the 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. Now Heber, the Kenite that had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched the tent by the great tree of Zenanim near Kadesh. When they told Sisera that Barak son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera summoned the Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River, all his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. Then Deborah said to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given to Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down to Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and the army from the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all of Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid. She entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. I'm thirsty, he said, please give me some water. She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. Stand in the doorway of the tent and told her, if anyone comes by and asks you, is anyone here, say no. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep. Exhausted, she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. Come, she said, I will show you the man you are looking for. So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera, with a tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Deborah, great story. Love it. I could talk about it for the rest of the lesson, but I don't have the time. Biggest thing, tent peg. Remember, tent pegs were probably about this long in there, and she drove it directly into the ground. One of the craziest ways to die I could ever imagine. All right, judge with a lamp and the trumpet in the head. I'll skip this one. This is Gideon. So Gideon basically had the psychological warfare. One of the weirdest stories. So he had, I can't remember if it was like 300,000 men, a lot of people. And then God's like, nah. That's too easy if I let you have all these people to do my work for me. So he says, send these ones away. So he sends them away. Now they're down to like 30,000 people. Essentially, he starts whittling it down to the point where he said, all right, bring everyone to the water, let them drink, and anyone who laps it up like a dog, that's the one you're taking to battle. One of the weirdest things I've ever heard. So again, lapping it up like a dog, not even like, normal people would scoop it up and drink it, but lap it up like a dog. Those are the people you're going to take with you. Whittles it down to 300 people. Now, these are not like your 300 Spartans that we're used to hearing about. These are actually, well, I'd like to call it the 300 weirdos that he's taken to battle with him. And as he talks to these people and convinces them of his battle plans, because I could only imagine me as a soldier getting told what these battle plans are, of these trumpets and pots, these clay pots. That's what you're going with. You're not going with any weapons. Go down, and I missed the whole part where Gideon basically was like, I don't really want to do this. This sounds kind of crazy to me. He said, hey, go down to the camp. Whatever you hear, it'll give you your wisdom. It'll give you your will back. Goes down, hears people going, yep, your dream tells you that we're gonna get overtaken. So he takes all his 300 dudes, surrounds them in the middle of the night. They start blowing trumpets and smashing clay pots on the ground. Everyone gets super confused and starts like running themselves through with swords, and they win. So that's Gideon in a nutshell. What an interesting story from a soldier standpoint. God has his own ways. He has very unique ways. But one of the things to remember as you hear about these are all ways that only God could have provided. And he's trying to remind people that he is king and they need to believe in him as he does it. All right. So the judge with the manuscript in the hand, so that's going to be Jephthah. He defeated the Ammonites in the process and made rash vows. So this is the judge that was like, God, if you give me victory today, whatever comes out of my house first, I will sacrifice to you. You guys remember, his daughter came out of the house first and got kind of crazy. So he lets her go off for a little bit to celebrate with her friends. There was much weeping and gnashing, and brought her back, and then he sacrificed her because that's what he promised to God. So Jephthah, what an interesting thing. But he won, and he delivered the Israelites. And Samson defeated the Philistines. So obviously he's got the jawbone in his hand. Again, super strange story about the jawbone, killing a bunch of people, getting his eyes gouged out, and then bringing the house down right at the very end. Give me the strength one more time, as he obviously had focused on women much more than he was supposed to do, set apart as a Nazarite, one of the most famous Nazarites we talk about, and was able to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines during that time through that way. All right. Some striking issues in the judges that we'd want to know. The first judge, Othniel, was Caleb's nephew. Both were characterized by their spiritual discernment in crisis. It was those that were close to God who could provide the leadership which people needed, right? Not necessarily physical strength, but the leadership needed at the time. Now, the cunning deceit in which Ehud practiced to lead the main divisions of the Moabite armies into a trap. So we talked about Ehud and the cunning thought of being a left-handed man, putting a sword in his right thigh, and then running through the fat leader. And the praise which the Song of Deborah reserved for those who rallied to meet the threat posed by the Canaanites. So, and then you hear in verse 13, it refers to the remnant of the noble, which included this remnant are the tribes of Ephraim, Benjamin, Zebulun, Issachar, and Naphtali. So within that song, when you guys read it, there was all those, but within that song, there was scorn for those who didn't come to help as well. The tribe of Reuben tarried among the sheepfold, Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan stayed by the ships, and Asher sat still at the coast of the sea. And then the psychological warfare, which was carried out by Gideon to throw the enemy into a wild kind of confusion, which we talked about. The effort which developed the tribes to subdue an oppressor during that time. And the vow of Jephthah and its bitter consequences with his daughter, and the relationship between Samson's strength and the fact that he was a Nazarite, that God provided for those. So at the very end, we just got the two questions to cover, and then we're done. I think I had written them down here in my book. At the very end, it asks, what is the significance of the incident in Judges, and how does it relate? So as you read those, you'll see there's a prediction. There's a prediction with the tribe of Benjamin when they start giving these blessings, right? They start blessing all these people. And when you read those, and I don't think I didn't write it in here. As you read those, it talks about exactly what's going to happen. And it was kind of that blessing that was given to them and described within that section that talks there. And what's the relationship between, between this Judges and this Genesis? And again, another prediction, the prediction of Dan, and you'll talk about the snake, the viper, and the rider tumbles backwards. Again, another description that didn't make any sense when we first read it, but now we're seeing those things come true. Because there's that snake, it will bite you or snap at the heels of the horse, and the rider will tumble backwards, which is the tribe of Dan, which is what we're seeing as they tumble backwards and don't go help during these threats. All right, 8:45, right on time for me. All right, that's it for the judges. That was quick and fast. There's a lot there. There's a lot more that I would love to cover, and maybe if I am so inclined after the Bethel series is done, I'll go deeper into some of these ones that I find quite interesting with it. But now, this is it. This is Christmas break for us. January 18th, we'll cover the Philistine menace. So you guys have plenty of time to read 1 Samuel. That's all we got for this one. Because you guys are all going to remember to that time, right? I'll try and remember to send an email out about a week or two ahead of time before we come back. I'll send my post-class email with the assignment and a reminder that we're not meeting until January 18th. And after that, we only have 8 lessons left in the Old Testament. And then we get to start again next fall, if you guys so choose. So I'll send you guys off with this blessing. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Amen. Thank you guys so much.